To unpick this story for us, Bénédicte Paviot, our correspondent in London, is on the line. And Bénédicte, just tell us what's been agreed and whether this is a victory for Mr. Lineker.
Well, after being headline news for 4, 5, 6 days, there is now an agreement between the BBC and its most highly paid presenter, Gary Lineker. He will, we understand now, return to BBC screens next weekend after reaching a deal with the corporation. The BBC says it will start an independent review of its social media guidelines, particularly focusing on freelancers, which is, for example, the case of Mr. Lineker. Now, there are very clear impartiality guidelines for current and news affairs presenters. But, of course, it has to be underlined, and indeed has been over this furore over the almost a week now, the fact that Gary Lineker is a sports presenter. And of course, part of his defense has been that he's been tweeting, he said, in a private capacity. Now, what will be looked at, and there may be other presenters that fall foul of that, is that when you're a freelancer, what are the clear guidelines, BBC guidelines about social media? So, to quote Gary Lineker, he has tweeted today that he is immeasurably proud to work for the BBC and, quote, cannot wait to get back in the match of the day chair. That's an iconic football programme, sports programme that's been presented during the weekend for years. The BBC's current social media guidance, it has to be said when you look at it, does have grey areas about freelancers. So for the moment, Gary Lineker has agreed to work with the current guidelines as they stand. They will remain in place. What is not clear is what the timeline of this review, independent review, is and who indeed is going to be carrying it out. As for Director General Tim Davie, he's admitted it currently contains what he calls these grey areas and said that enforcing impartiality is a difficult balancing act. He says he has not, underlines not, bowed to any political pressure.
Well, you mentioned Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC. There'd been some questions that he might actually have to resign. So big was this story getting. Can you give us a sense, Bénédicte, as to why this issue has generated such big headlines in the UK, why this story matters so much?
It matters so much, it's generated so many headlines because the BBC is a public broadcaster. On the one hand, you have an independent staff that is both on-screen and off-screen in news and current affairs. But what you do have is a chairman that is appointed by the government of the day. And what has happened, I would say particularly, for example, but it's always been that way, but the Iraq War, then I think in a post-Brexit era, is that the BBC, television and radio, all programmes, particularly news and current affairs, has become a political football. And I'm not using a pun there. It is literally being criticised, attacked by whether it's the government of the day. But if you attack the government of the day, and it is perceived that Gary Lineker did when he compared the language of the government about the illegal migration bill last Tuesday to Germany of the 1930s, you can see that that is a very confrontational and can be perceived as a confrontational issue. So the government has steered clear, and the Prime Minister over the weekend, Sunak, said it is for the BBC to sort out. The main opposition party, the Labour Party, have criticised the BBC and have said that this is all too slow and that they've come to bad decisions. So crisis management, I think, will be another part of the review, and we'll see what guidelines, new guidelines for freelancers they come up with.
Bénédicte Paviot in London, thanks very much indeed for explaining that story to us.